A fine mist of rain descended over Houston on that humid June evening in 1965, casting the city in a gray pallor that matched the mood of Detective Frank Holloway. As he navigated his unmarked police sedan through the quiet, tree-lined streets of Montrose, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. 20 years on the force had given him a sixth sense for trouble, and it was prickling at the back of his neck. The call had come in shortly after 7 p.m. A concerned nephew hadn't heard from his elderly aunt and uncle in several days, which wasn't like them. Fred and Edwina Rogers were creatures of habit, church on Sundays, grocery shopping on Tuesdays, and a phone call to family every other day. When 3 days passed without word, Herman Rogers decided it was time to check on them. Holloway pulled up to the modest bungalow on Driscoll Street, its white paint peeling at the edges, a newspaper still wrapped in plastic on the front step. Officer Daniels was already there, talking to a middle-aged man who looked increasingly distraught. "Detective Holloway," Daniels nodded as Frank approached. "This is Herman Rogers. He's been trying to reach his aunt and uncle since Monday." "They always answer their phone," Herman said, wringing his hands. "And Aunt Edwina never misses our Wednesday call." "Never. Something's wrong." Holloway studied the house. The curtains were drawn tight despite the early evening hour. No lights shone from within. The detective's unease deepened. "You have a key to the house, Mr. Rogers?" Herman shook his head. "No, but Aunt Edwina keeps a spare under the stone frog by the back door. For emergencies." "I'd say this qualifies," Holloway said. "Let's have a look." They circled around to the back of the house, where Herman retrieved the key from its hiding place. The backyard was overgrown, unusual for Fred Rogers, who Herman said took meticulous care of his lawn. The key turned easily in the lock, and the three men stepped into the kitchen. The first thing that hit them was the smell, subtle but unmistakable. Holloway had encountered it too many times not to recognize it: death. "Mr. Rogers, wait outside please," he instructed, his voice firm but gentle. When Herman hesitated, Daniels guided him back toward the front yard. Holloway moved methodically through the house, noting the undisturbed living room with its doilies and family photos. Nothing seemed out of place, yet everything felt wrong. In the master bedroom, the bed was made with military precision. The bathroom was spotless, towels hanging perfectly aligned on their racks. Returning to the kitchen, he noticed a few unwashed dishes in the sink, unusual for the fastidious Edwina, according to Herman. The refrigerator hummed in the corner, and something about it caught Holloway's attention. It was a newer model, gleaming white against the faded yellow wallpaper. But as he drew closer, he noticed dark smudges on the handle. With a growing sense of dread, Holloway pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and used it to open the refrigerator door. What he saw in that moment would haunt him for the rest of his career. Inside, arranged with a horrifying meticulousness, were dismembered human remains. A head, wrapped partially in newspaper, stared back at him with clouded eyes. Limbs had been carefully stacked, cleaned of blood, and placed on the shelves as if they were nothing more than leftover Sunday roast. Holloway slammed the door shut and stepped back, his breathing rapid. He'd seen gruesome crime scenes before, but nothing like this, nothing so calculated, so coldly executed. He steadied himself against the counter and called for Daniels. "Get the nephew out of here," he ordered when the officer appeared. "And call for backup. All available units. And get the medical examiner over here right away." Within the hour, the quiet neighborhood was transformed. Police cars lined the street, their red and blue lights painting the night in eerie flashes. Neighbors gathered behind hastily erected barricades, whispering among themselves as reporters began to arrive, drawn by the police radio chatter. Inside, Dr. Eleanor Martinez, the assistant medical examiner, knelt before the open refrigerator, her face a mask of professional detachment. "Male and female victims," she said, her voice steady despite the horror before her. "Elderly. The man was bludgeoned, look at the fracturing on the skull. The woman was shot, small caliber, close range. She pointed to a wound in the side of the female head. They've been dead at least 3 days, but the cold has slowed decomposition. Holloway nodded grimly. Can you tell me anything else? Martinez carefully examined the remains. The dismemberment was done with skill. Clean cuts, minimal tearing. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. Maybe medical training, or butchery experience. She looked up at him. And they took their time, Frank. This wasn't a frenzied attack. It was calculated. A young officer appeared in the doorway, his face pale. Detective? You need to see this. Holloway followed him down a narrow hallway to a bedroom at the back of the house. Unlike the rest of the immaculate home, this room was cluttered, with papers scattered across a desk and bed. Maps and charts covered one wall, marked with symbols and notations that made little sense to Holloway. This appears to be the son's room, the officer said. Charles Rogers. According to the nephew, he lived here but was a recluse. Barely spoke to his parents, let alone anyone else. Holloway surveyed the room. Where is he now? That's just it, sir. No sign of him. But look, the officer pointed to the floor, where a faint trail of brownish stains led from the hallway to the closet. We think it's blood, sir. Holloway crouched down, studying the stains. They were consistent with someone trying to clean up a mess but missing spots in their haste. The trail ended at the closet, where several items of clothing were missing, leaving empty hangers. So the son does this, then flees, Holloway mused aloud. But why? What drives a man to butcher his parents and place them in a refrigerator? He began to sift through the papers on the desk. Most were technical, geological surveys, oil field reports. Charles Rogers, they would soon learn, was a geophysicist who'd worked for various oil companies. Brilliant but deeply troubled. As they continued their search, more officers arrived, and the house was transformed into a processing center for what would become one of Houston's most notorious crime scenes. Herman Rogers sat in his car across the street, hands trembling as he lit his third cigarette in an hour. Detective Holloway approached, his face grave. Mr. Rogers, I need to ask you some questions about your cousin Charles. Herman exhaled a plume of smoke. Charles? I haven't seen him in years. No one has, really. He comes and goes like a ghost. What can you tell me about him? He was always different. Brilliant, they said. Went to university on a scholarship. But after the war, something changed. Herman flicked ash onto the pavement. He became paranoid, withdrawn. Would only communicate with his parents through notes slipped under his bedroom door, even though they lived in the same house. Did he have any reason to harm his parents? Herman looked shocked. Are they? His voice trailed off, unable to form the question. Holloway nodded grimly. I'm afraid so. And Charles is missing. My God. Herman looked away, tears forming. I don't know why he would do such a thing. Uncle Fred was strict, sure, but... He paused, considering. There were rumors, years ago. About Fred and his temper. About how he treated Charles as a boy. But families have problems, detective. It doesn't lead to whatever happened in there. As the night wore on, more details emerged. Charles Frederick Rogers, 43, had a history of isolation so extreme that neighbors reported going years without seeing him, despite knowing he lived in the house. He would leave for work before dawn and return after dark, taking his meals alone in his room. The search of his bedroom revealed a man obsessed with geology but also with surveillance. Notebooks contained meticulous recordings of conversations, both from within the house and seemingly from other locations. Some entries were coded, using symbols that matched those on the maps. We need to find him, Holloway told his team during a briefing at midnight. Alert all bus stations, train depots, and airports. His photo goes out to every patrol car. He can't have gotten far. But as days turned into weeks, Charles Rogers remained elusive. His car was found abandoned at a bus station, but no one remembered seeing him board any bus. His bank accounts remained untouched. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. The press had a field day with what they dubbed the Icebox Murders. The gruesome details captivated the public's imagination, and theories abounded. Some suggested Charles had been planning the murders for years, noting the refrigerator was a newer model, possibly purchased with this specific purpose in mind. Holloway wasn't convinced. The crime seemed both methodical and impulsive, a contradiction that nagged at him. 6 weeks into the investigation, a new lead emerged. A former colleague of Charles from Shell Oil came forward, claiming Charles had spoken of government work beyond his geological research. He was paranoid about being followed, the man told Holloway in a downtown diner, nervously glancing over his shoulder as he spoke. Said he had information that powerful people wanted. I thought he was just being eccentric, but now. Did he mention any names? Any specific agencies? The man hesitated. Once, after a few drinks, he mentioned something about Cuba. About Bay of Pigs. Said he'd been there, mapping caves or something. I didn't believe him at the time. Holloway leaned forward. Did he ever mention the CIA? Not directly. But he implied he'd done work that wasn't strictly geological. The man fidgeted with his coffee cup. Look, detective, Charles was brilliant but unstable. The kind of guy who'd see connections where none existed. But he was afraid of something real at the end. I could tell. This new information sent the investigation in a different direction. If Charles had indeed been involved with intelligence work, could that explain his extreme reclusiveness? His paranoia? Perhaps even the murder of his parents? Holloway spent days combing through what few records existed of Charles's life. His university transcripts showed exceptional aptitude in geology and languages. Military records confirmed he'd served in the Navy during World War II, with postings that remained classified. After the war, his employment history showed gaps that couldn't be accounted for. 3 months after the murders, another potential breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A woman claiming to be a former girlfriend of Charles contacted the police. She spoke of a man tormented by his past, by a domineering father who had subjected him to years of abuse. Fred Rogers was a monster, she told Holloway, her voice barely above a whisper. The things he did to Charles as a child. Charles never recovered. He told me once that someday there would be a reckoning. When was the last time you saw him? Holloway asked. 1962, after Kennedy was shot, he became even more withdrawn. Said it wasn't safe to be seen together. She looked up, her eyes haunted. I always wondered if he knew something about that too. The Kennedy connection seemed far-fetched to Holloway, yet it was a thread that refused to be dismissed entirely. Charles had lived in Houston, had possible intelligence connections, and had vanished around the time of a high-profile assassination. Coincidence, most likely, but in Holloway's experience, coincidences often deserved a second look. As the first anniversary of the murders approached, the case had gone cold. Despite an international manhunt, Charles Rogers had not been found. No credit card activity, no confirmed sightings. It was as if he had ceased to exist. Holloway, now assigned to other cases, couldn't let it go. On his own time, he continued to pursue leads, to re-interview witnesses, to pore over the evidence. Something about the case didn't add up. If Charles had killed his parents in a fit of rage or as the culmination of years of abuse, why the elaborate staging? Why clean and refrigerate the remains rather than dispose of them? It suggested a message, a statement, but to whom? And if he had been involved in covert operations, could the murders be connected? Could Fred and Edwina have discovered something they shouldn't have? The questions multiplied, but answers remained elusive. On a rainy evening much like the one when the bodies were discovered, Holloway sat in his home office, surrounded by case files. His wife brought him a cup of coffee, concern etched on her face. You need to let this one go, Frank, she said gently. It's consuming you. He looked up at her, his eyes tired. I can't. Not until I understand why. Some things don't have answers, she replied. Some people are just broken. But Holloway couldn't accept that. In his mind, every crime had a logic to it, a motive that made sense to the perpetrator, even if to no one else. As the years passed, the case of the Icebox murders became legendary in Houston police circles. Young detectives would ask Holloway about it, eager for insights from the man who had led the investigation. He would tell them what he knew, what he suspected, but never his deepest theories, the ones that kept him awake at night. In 1975, a decade after the murders, a man matching Charles Rogers's description was reportedly seen in Mexico City. Holloway, now a senior detective nearing retirement, flew down to investigate. The lead, like so many before it, evaporated upon scrutiny. On the flight back to Houston, Holloway contemplated the possibility that they would never find Charles Rogers, that the man had either met his own end or had constructed a new identity so thoroughly that he was beyond discovery. Yet something still nagged at him, a detail that had never quite fit. In Charles's bedroom, among the maps and coded notes, they had found a single photograph, Charles as a young man, standing proudly in his Navy uniform. Written on the back were the words, "The truth remains." What truth? The truth about his parents' deaths? About his own disappearance? Or something larger, something that connected to the whispered rumors of intelligence work and international intrigue? Holloway would never know. He retired in 1980, the Icebox murders still unsolved. Charles Rogers was declared legally dead in 1975, but no body was ever found, no confession ever made. The case continued to fascinate true crime enthusiasts and conspiracy theorists alike. Books were written, theories proposed. Some believed Charles had been a CIA operative who knew too much about the Kennedy assassination. Others suggested he had been framed, that the Real killers were connected to organized crime or to intelligence agencies covering their tracks. The truth, if it existed at all, remained buried with the secrets Charles Rogers had taken with him when he vanished. In 2000, an elderly Holloway gave an interview to a Houston newspaper for a retrospective on the city's most notorious crimes. When asked about the Icebox murders, he paused before responding. In 40 years of police work, no case haunted me like that one, he said. Not because of the brutality, I've seen worse, but because of the questions it raised. Who was Charles Rogers, really? What drove him to such an act? And where did he go? The reporter leaned forward. Do you think we'll ever know the truth? Holloway's weathered face creased in a sad smile. The truth remains, he said, echoing the words from the back of that photograph. It's out there somewhere. But whether it will ever come to light. He shook his head. Some mysteries are destined to remain unsolved. As Houston continues to evolve, the house on Driscoll Street was eventually demolished, replaced by new construction that bears no trace of the horror that once occurred there. Yet the story of the Icebox murders persists, a chilling reminder of the darkness that can exist within seemingly ordinary lives. The questions remain: was Charles Rogers a calculating killer who murdered his parents and evaded justice? A victim himself who finally snapped after years of abuse? Or was he caught in something larger, a pawn in a game of international intrigue and espionage? Perhaps someday, in a dusty archive or a deathbed confession, the answers will emerge. Until then, the case of Fred and Edwina Rogers and their missing son Charles stands as one of the most perplexing unsolved murders in American history, a grisly tableau frozen in time like the remains in that refrigerator on a humid Houston night in June 1965. The truth remains, indeed.